Hello, everyone, and welcome to Crafty Chat. This is episode number 21. My name is Heidi, and I am here, as always, with Lucy and Nancy, and our special guest today, Anne, who works with us at the library and is involved in many, many crafts. I know you do a lot of spinning and knitting, and you sew period costumes and clothing. But the thing that really drew me into having you here today was your work with natural dyes, because we were doing another program with somebody else about natural dyes, and then I met with you and learned about all you're doing, and it was just really incredible and fascinating because of all the research you've been doing and the documentation. So I'm sure we'll touch on many things. Anyway, you'd like to introduce yourself, or that you'd like to say to start off?
Well, so my name is Anne Asplund, and I am currently a textile artist, and I do everything in historical textiles because I am also very big into historical reenactment and living history.
Very good.
And I've been doing that for approximately 20 years.
20 years?
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah, I started when I got to university. I started LARPing, and since then it's gone into reenactment and living history. And that was 98, so that's actually more than 20 years.
That is just so, yeah, I guess, like, what's the genesis? Like, what initially got you into all that? Like, how did you learn even to be making the period costumes?
Well, first of all, I was lucky. In Sweden we have basic textile and woodcraft in school. Mm-hmm. And when I went to the university, it was like some people were like, hey, we're going to go for LARP this weekend. Do you want to come with us? And I was like, dress? Sure. And it didn't take long before I was making my own costumes, but also for other people. So I had a lot of people asking me making costumes from the beginning. So the first thing I ever made was a cloak, and then since then it's just gone on, so to speak. Everyone keeps asking me for different kinds of costumes, and many times I get to make something new because they haven't had it before. So it's a research project every time.
That's really cool. For the folks that aren't familiar with the term, LARP is an acronym for live action role play. There's a lot of different types of LARPing that are done. It can be period specific, it can be fantasy, some of it can be role play that's related to like a board game. But a lot of the really popular ones are historical reenactment live action role plays. And there's multiple different types that are intricate or simple. And it's a lot of where reconstructionist costuming that I know of, reconstructionist costuming comes in, is creating those outfits to wear at those events. So
yeah, that's when we started, and then I ended up in a group that does historical reenactment and with role play in part of it. Mm-hmm. So and we were lucky. We were having access to Viking museums, and we had access to buildings, and we had access to some medieval castles that we were allowed to borrow for events and such. So we had a blast, really.
So do you primarily focus with like medieval times? Is that like your favorite time?
Yeah, well, it's kind of the European, the Western Europe, like England. Early medieval is what is then called the Viking or late Iron Age in Sweden. So Sweden doesn't really hit what we would call medieval times until like 1050.
Okay.
So I'm literally going from about 700 to 1600s.
That is awesome.
That is this pretty significant chunk of time. Is there any particular period during that that's your favorite to work with, or that you wanted do more research into as far as costuming?
Well, I'm currently focused a lot on of course, the Iron Age, the Viking period. It's one of my favorite costumes to make. But I also do First Crusades.
Okay.
And then I also want to do some 14th century stuff that I'm currently working on, because that's a much more layered costume with corsets and such.
That's cool. So we brought you on to talk a little bit about natural dyeing. I kind of took you on a little bit of a costuming journey there, but what got you into natural dyeing? And what kind of stuff are you working on now, I guess?
Well, part of it's because my husband does medieval book art. And me being a botanist, I'm the one that grows his plants for making the medieval paints for his medieval books.
That's really cool.
But he makes miniature pictures, so he just uses a little bit, and then I have another pile that literally left of the medieval dye plants. So I started using them for dyeing them, and part of it was also that people coming to me making costumes or asking costume dyes kept asking, what colors can I use? So part of what I'm doing is I'm going for medieval dye plants, and I'm trying to create as many different hues that would be possible for them to have, to create a sample range for people doing medieval costuming. Give some kind of like, what colors could I use?
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting to me, because there's that perception of that really broad medieval period in Western Europe where it's like the Dark Ages, folks all just wear like tans and browns and there's no colors, which in actuality there's there's all kinds of different plants that folks would use for dyes. What were the most common ones, or what are some of the ones that you use in your dyes?
Yeah, so one of the most oldest and the one that we have most information about is madder. Madder has been used over 4,000 years and older even. It's a very strong root. It gives really nice reds, different kinds of colors of red, and depending how you treat it, you can actually also get purple and orange.
Oh, cool.
Other ones are weld. That is Reseda luteola, that gives a yellow on almost anything, really. And then, of course, woad and indigo. They actually used both indigo from India and woad from Scandinavia during the time period. They only separate them by calling the indigo the Baghdad indigo. Woad was actually called indigo. But so those three, just combining them, you can get everything from blue, red, purple, green, all the colors you need, really. And then, of course, they were using, what's the other one? There's a lot, like almost any green plant will give yellow. So they will be used, depending where you are in Europe, you will be using them. But the big main ones are the madder, woad, and indigo.
So one thing I remember talking with you about, how everybody wants to use lichen. They get all excited about natural dyes and they want to attack all the lichen, and you're like, no.
Yeah,
there's so many other things you could use.
As a botanist, I'm seriously a bit afraid of it, because people are just grabbing lichens without knowing what lichens they're grabbing, or even considering how slow they grow and how threatened they are as species. They're actually protected in most countries where they go, and people don't even think about them being possible to be protected. So, and it's also like, when you use them, you have to use very high alkali baths or ferment them. While instead, if you really want purple, you can just use madder and use some iron. So there are so many other ways to do that, instead of using species that are threatened or hard to use or hard to collect, because you don't know which one you're actually collecting.
Right. Yeah. That's something that I think you talked about alkalis and really strong chemicals. Yes. That's kind of something that's inherent in a lot of different dyeing processes. So what kind of, because I think when folks hear natural dye, they think, you just throw your fiber in a pot with the plants and, cook it, maybe heat it for a little while. What are some of the different chemicals that you use, and how do they affect the colors?
Okay, so there are different kinds of dyes to begin with, and some dyes have their own mordant with them.
Mhm.
And mordants are used to make the color to actually bite onto the fibers.
Mhm.
And mordants are most commonly used are alum, which is aluminum salt. It's aluminum sulfate, actually. When you buy it today, rock alum is aluminum sulfate potassium. There's also metal salts from copper and iron that's used, and traditionally also chrome and tin, but these are quite toxic. Chrome much more than tin, but still, and even copper and iron in high doses can cause a lot of damage. So, but used in the right way and by taking precautions, they're very safe to use. Actually, alum is the least toxic that we know. It's actually been used for food preservations.
Mhm.
But then we also have colors that doesn't actually need mordants, like indigo, for example. Indigo is a dye that has its own chemistry, so you actually convert it to a form that is called white indigo. And then when you combine that with oxygen, it actually binds onto the fiber directly, so you don't actually need a mordant for indigo. And other mordants that are used are tannins, which are acids. And many plant dyes actually has their own tannins because they're plant material that actually has tannins in them. So they don't always need mordant. Those you can actually just pop in and boil them.
Yeah, that's I've done indigo dyeing in the past. That's one of my favorite things is that the liquid itself is like lime green.
Yes.
Like a dark lime green, and then when you put the fabric in the water, it doesn't actually, like, you can't see it on the fabric. You can kind of see it, but it darkens over time as the as the dye oxidizes and binds to the fabric, and it's really, really cool. We've done it a couple times at the library, and then I've done it a couple times on my own. That's the only one that I have experience with because it's the easiest to work with. So
yeah, it's the easiest if you use the modern chemicals ones, but it's a bit trickier when you do the fermentation ones because it doesn't always want to ferment.
Yeah, have you had so you said that you grow your own plants. Do you focus on a specific range of plants that you grow as a botanist?
Well, I have weld, and I have woad, and I have the madder, and then I have some additional dye color plants that my husband uses for his medieval paints.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to expand into actually grow some calendula or pot marigold and some other coreopsis to use for dyes.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So, and I'm also testing. I was testing the garlic mustard this year to see if it was a weed that could actually be useful.
Yeah, it's always finding a good use for the weeds that come up. That's my best.
So when you're making do you use these dyes then for your costumes that you're making and your?
Yes. So I have first of all, I'm just doing small samples to have on hand, but I have dyed some friends' linens and such for their costumes. I have dyed my veil. So this is actually linen and madder.
Oh wow,
that's really pretty.
I'm going to be dyeing more and more parts of my costumes, but the problem is that the larger pieces of fabric you have to dye, the larger equipment you need.
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of between being over the fire pit or using the electric stove outside. So, and it's still, even when you have the big pot, it's hard to get it even if you can have it circulating and moving freely. So
yeah, because a lot of those dyes need to be constantly agitated or mixed. I know that's I've done a little bit of research into chemical dyeing for yarn because as a knitter, I'm very, very deeply attracted to a lot of the really bright and vivid acid dyes that are non-natural dyes. They're all straight chemicals. So very, very different area. But that's something that they talk about a lot, is that kettle dyeing or dyeing something in a big pot is difficult because you have to have enough space between the fibers to let the dye permeate through them and then be constantly moving them so that there's no blank spaces that the dye doesn't penetrate. So you don't end up with something like a tie dye where you're intentionally using a resist to get a pattern. With a lot of dyeing, you want actually like as consistent of a color as possible.
Well, for the natural plant dyes, it's more important that the fiber is completely wetted through before.
Mhm.
And for many of them, you actually just simmer them for a while and then you actually let them sit overnight. And it's more the fact that the dye will go through the different temperature stages that will actually fix it more evenly. You have to move it around a little bit, and you have to be careful if you have the dye material in the pot, because that can settle on the yarn and causes larger spots that are darker. But if you're dyeing wool, you can't really agitate it too much because you can actually cause the wool to felt.
Yes, that too.
You have it's a finer balance, and if you can not play with it too much and just make sure it has enough space to move by itself, and make sure that it just allowed to go up and down in temperature more gently, it's better for an even result. But for making it's also depending if you're doing yarn or fabrics. The old trick with fabrics is that you have a beam to pull the fabric over. So you have some kind of like a wooden pole or a rod or a plastic pipe tubing that you actually pull the fabric up and down, in and out of the dye bath to make the fabric even. But I don't have one, so.
Yeah, that's.
So you've been working in a very scientific method, is best way I can put it, for your research with the plants, and using them with certain mordants, and then also using them with overdyes at the end.
Yes.
So I wanted to kind of bring that up because I was just fascinated by your journals.
Yeah,
how you're keeping such great records. But then I also was curious if, how easily are these recreated, I guess?
Yeah, so that's always a problem, and this actually shows that too, because this was the same dye, 5 different mordants and 5 different afterbats, but in 3 different waters.
Oh wow!
So this is with my home water, and then this one was with a water on a site in Minnesota that was very, very rich in iron. And these samples went with me to Minnesota and got soaked in that water, and then taken home and washed in my water before it was dyed again. So just the amount of iron in the water changes it a lot. And then you have the individual changes for the different mordants, and then the different after treatments. So like this is no mordant, and you have no after treatment, acid, alkali, copper, and iron.
Oh yeah, I can see the difference in that.
So if you, so this is with alum, for example, and then the different after treatments. And it's also, I have this white yarn versus gray yarn for each of them. So that's why it's lighter versus darker. So to replicate something, you really have to have like the same water and the same plant. But if it's the same dye bath and the same plant, it might already be used up in the first one. So you can never really like be sure to have exactly the same, because besides the water, besides the plant, and you don't know if the plant was growing on the same spot and had the same amount of nitrogen versus potassium, who knows? Then like, are you using the same pot? Some pots are reactive with the dye you're using. Some pots are not reactive. And then again, did you hit the right temperature when you were cooking it?
That's an almost mind-boggling number of variables to work with. So I can absolutely understand why you come at it from a scientific perspective, because it's going to be really hard to recreate any of the colors you're getting if you don't. Because that's when you said about the plants and like the soil that they're in and the amount of nitrogen and the kind of minerals that they're getting, that's an even more unknown, I would think, because soil testing is not easy. Water testing these days is a little bit easier to do. With home kits, but like soil testing, it's a little more complicated.
Yeah, and also not all plants uses the same chemicals to make the dyes.
Yeah, exactly. Wow.
And is there a difference between a plant that is 5 days versus 10 days?
That is a big question. So how much like
that's what I was wondering too. So I was going to say you're working with fresh plant. Well, not always. Sometimes it's dried.
Yes.
So if it's dried, you can hold on to it. But like if you wanted to work with a fresh plant, is it possible to make a dye bath and like keep it around for a few months and then use it later? Like, so in the dead of winter, you could be dyeing with,
Yes, some of them do. Like I have a walnut bath that is several years old.
Mm.
It ate through 2 buckets of plastic. It is now in a different bucket. There is but I also had like a huge glass jar that was an onion bath, and that looked fine for several years. And this year I opened it, it was black, and it was orange to start with. So I was like, So sometimes the dye bath might still be usable, but it might not be giving the right original color.
Mhm.
And sometimes you open them and you find that they have grown little furry bobs. Mold does not necessarily make it impossible to use. You fish them out and you raise the temperature to kill whatever it's in there, and you can use it, and it might actually still give the same color, but maybe more muted.
Mhm.
So yes, you can save some of them, but not indefinitely. And depending how hot they were when they closed the lid, and how furry it will be after a while is depending on how good you were of cleaning the jar to begin with.
True.
And some of them will develop interesting smells. Mostly those smells will actually not stay on the yarn if you're lucky. So that's usually not like, a lot of people are very like, oh, you have to use urine for fermenting the indigo, and like, what's that gonna smell? But it actually dissipates after just a few days.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Are there any like because I know that's something of a lot of the historical reading that I've done on natural dyes is that perspective that because especially like I'm thinking of tanning more than dyeing, but the smells and the chemicals that come out of it are what deter folks casually from like, oh my God, why would you ever want to do that? Modern practices are so much better. Are there any smells that you haven't been able to get out of yarn and fabric?
Well, for the fabric dye, the plant dyeing, it hasn't really been a problem. As soon as you finish dyeing it and it has dried, it really smells at all. It might smell if you get a bit moist afterwards, but it's never really been a distressing smell. But I haven't reused my really, really bad smelly ones. So that's, I haven't, they had not just changed color, they had turned really weird and ooky, and I was deciding that this was not worth saving. But yeah, no, I don't think I have really had any smell problem. But like, since I do needle binding and such, and you put the jar between your teeth to join them together, felt them together, you don't do that with the hand dyed yarn because that can taste a bit funny.
Yeah, that.
So that it's more like that you don't want to, suck on it.
Yeah.
But smells has not really been a problem.
So do the inks also, do they have an aroma? The inks that your husband uses?
Yeah, so depending which ink you're doing, like the oak galls just has a little bit of a, I would call it nutty smell almost, but like the black walnut, the dye actually smells like pencil sharpeners, like the pencil sharpeners, the filing.
Oh, cool.
I know.
Yeah, and
there's a blast from the past.
yeah, and Matters has a bit of like a beetroot kind of hint of it. Onion has like, it doesn't really smell like onion. It has a popcorn tinge to it, like popcorn onion. I don't know. It makes a weird smell.
Yeah. That's funny that like it influence that synesthesia, like with like the color of the ink smelling like something, so you're gonna start to associate.
Yeah, and like the alder cones, it has like the pencil shaving, but with a hint of not apricot, but it's sweeter somehow. And we were doing some experiments with alder cones for using as both dye and tannin solution, and it actually made better ink than the oak galls. Cool. So.
And now I'm going off into the ink thing because I'm just curious, how do the inks get thick? Because they have to be thicker than a dye bath.
Yes. Well, a traditional ink that is done with oak galls or any other tanning source, and you add the iron sulfate to it, you then also add a binder like gum arabic. and that makes them thick.
Okay.
They have also, in some of them, you add actually lamp black to it, which is literally carbon on an atomic level. So to make it really like body, but the actual ochre ink on parchment doesn't really need a body because it will stain the parchment pretty thoroughly.
Yeah.
But yes, many people also added the lamp black to it to make it really thick.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to the fibers now. I know you had pulled out some samples of things, and I assume maybe one of them might be something that's a favorite, like if you have a favorite fiber that you work with or a favorite dye bath that you're just really impressed by what results you get. I know I was shocked. I can't remember which plant it was, but one of the yellows.
Yeah, that's
like
the
glowing.
weld. Let's see here. That's if we can see it in this light.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
It's pretty bright, yeah.
Yeah, let's pull it out on the chart. That doesn't show much. Let's pull it up in this one instead. Oh, there we go. So yeah, it's hard to see, but it's really, really yellow. The first time I did it with fresh yarn on in a water from a well from that was not the city water, it was chicken yellow. It was big bird yellow.
Wow.
And people are like, oh, they didn't wear short, clear colors, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, they could wear chicken yellow if they wanted. They actually liked yellow a lot, so.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be careful. If you were wearing a yellow hood, you were a lady of the negotiable affection trade.
Ah.
So,
A
no
lady,
yellow hoods.
a lady of negotiable, what was that?
Affection.
Oh. Okay.
I love that term. I've
I
never
know, I
heard
think
that
it's a
before.
very different but great term. Yeah, terminology. Yeah.
I do like some of the cultural connotations of color. That's something that I'm interested in from a creative perspective, and beyond that a little bit is just like how the usage of color changes over time and per different cultures, and it can change even decade to decade. So
Yes.
I've always thought that was really, really interesting. So because
Yeah,
now it's red, right? It's not yellow anymore. It's red is now the color of that more theme. So.
Yes. Well, yeah, if with stilettos probably, but it's a lot of times also people don't realize that the names of colors has changed. Mm-hmm. Pink was actually the name for yellow.
Really?
So, yes, and what people called red in medieval times included everything from orange to dark burgundy, more or less. So when people have been talking about the Plato's wine dark sea, and like that doesn't mean that the sea was wine colored. Mm-hmm. Like red burgundy, it means other things. So people also have to be aware that the actual names and words people use for colors were not the same.
Yeah.
I have friends doing research in the Viking sagas and picture about the blue cloaks, or which probably was black, or the black cloaks that were probably blue, because it was a word used for both of them.
Mm-hmm. That's actually interesting you bring that up, because I was reading an article last week about color in ancient Greece and how a lot of the way that modern scholars have translated colors in Greek epics does not convey what the original author was intending. So we're looking at a perspective of like a color is a finite thing, and it's usually a metaphor or an analogy of, like you say, blue like the sky, or yellow like a flower, where colors in ancient Greece were more contextual. They had a much broader meaning, or they had a more poetic sense. So the colors were very bright, but they weren't they didn't think about color the same way that we did. So it was the big question at the end of the article, was like, can we really as modern people understand exactly what the author was getting at, considering that we see these concepts so differently now than they did back then. So
yeah, and for example, black was the most expensive color of all.
Really?
Yes, because with the early sheep we had, they didn't have pure black sheep. It took a while before they showed up. So to dye black, you had to use a lot of iron to it, and that made the fabric much more fragile. So it would literally fall apart. So it took quite a while before they actually had pure black, because even when you had like black sheep, that black would actually fade in sunlight like hair, because it is hair.
Yeah.
So even still today, the best way to get black, it's actually to dye blue or dark green many, many, many times. And just the fact that you're dyeing so many times just to get black is why it's made it so expensive. And it was the Spanish court was using black as the court color because they had the secret, so to speak, of the black. They had the black sheep and the black silk.
That's
so that
really
was
cool.
like the fancy color.
Yeah. I guess that puts that idea of like merchant black into perspective of why. That's something that's really popular in like young adult medieval-esque novels, is like merchant black as an idea of status, and it's just for expensive. That's
it
really
is
question
the
that.
most expensive.
Because
Yeah,
I think we think of now. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, you can even get fox red from actual natural colors of sheep.
Ooh. Now I need to find yarn that's fox red. I know I've seen alpaca yarn that's more of a ruddy kind of chestnut color.
Yeah, you would have to look for Norwegian spellsow.
Yeah, you would.
Were you about to ask something else though, Nancy? Or
Oh, I think I was about to say that there's a perception nowadays also that like purple is the hardest color or the most expensive color to dye. So I find that perspective on black really interesting. And it kind of jives. I don't know why I never questioned that, because it kind of jives with a lot of the modern dyeing that I was looking at. I wear a lot of black. I like black a lot. It was something that I kind of wrote off as a possibility for dyeing yarn because it seemed so hard. It seemed so complicated. A lot of the tutorials and stuff that I was finding online were, you got to dye it 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
You got to use really heavy chemicals. It's complicated. So.
Yeah, I'm trying to find my purple here right now. So this is actually, see that purple?
It's really pretty. Yeah, that's
yeah.
more.
That is just iron mordant on madder.
That's cool. And that would have been much easier to do, I would think.
Yeah, it would probably even be done without even thinking about it, because if they use an iron pot, they would get it automatically.
Yep. That's yeah, because one of the purple dyes that I think was introduced to me early in my history classes was cochineal or cochineal. How is it said?
Cochineal.
Cochineal. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm sorry. It's a shell. It's a snake.
No, cochineal is a scaled insect.
Oh, okay. See that?
Yes,
it's like a beetle.
So,
yeah.
Yes. So there's Polish cochineal that they were used during the medieval times before America was discovered, when we started using the Mexican cochineal that lives on palm trees, which is my name. Cactuses. That's the word. And they're much easier to harvest than the Polish cochineals because they live on the roots on tiny little weeds. Cochineal is actually, I have cochineal here in my pile. It has this kind of colors, but as soon as you add modifier, you get purples.
Oh wow, yeah, that red's more like a magenta on my screen. That might just
be... it's super magenta. And cochineal has that really red, and it's what was used for doing the red coats of the British Army. But otherwise, the shellfish one is the Turian purple, and that's the dogwinkle or whelk. And it was actually used by the ancient Phoenicians in such a degree that they almost caused it to be extinct, which is why purple was so expensive in Roman time, because there wasn't that much left. And that's why it was only the emperor allowed to wear it. But that is a literally fermented shellfish that stinks.
Yeah, that was...
I'm like, I would go with madder purple any day.
Yep.
So. Yeah,
because that fish smell's not going to come out.
No, it's just, people were joking. That's why people kept away from the emperor, because he smelled the fish. I don't know how true that is. It's just something that I've heard as an anecdote.
I'll accept that as a headcanon.
Yeah, and I think there was an exhibit at the Kelsey Museum before all the COVID started of colors, and they actually have some Turium purple dyed stuff there.
Oh, that would have been cool.
Yes. Unfortunately, it's really hard to photograph. It usually comes out as brown in photographs, so you actually have to see it in person to see it being purple. It's a really dark purple. So that's also part of the problem with this. Like, natural dyes doesn't photograph in the same way as chemical dyes do, because it's connected how they reflect the light much more intimately. So it's really hard to photograph natural dyes and have the actual colors show up, especially reds.
That's really interesting. I didn't think of that with the way the cameras work, how it doesn't, I mean, cameras can kind of mimic what the eye does, but not in the same regard. So that's interesting.
Yeah. It can be similar, like even with gemstones, like if you bring them out into the sunlight, that you see a lot more of the depth of color that,
yes,
especially something like this, it's like a garnet. It looks kind of brown, but as soon as it's in the sun, it's like you can see how rich a red it is. So.
Yeah, and the camera sees many more different levels of red for red fabric, especially in wool, than the eyes that we see. So every time you try to photograph like a nice red wool, it looks like it's super neon in the photograph, which is really annoying because you're trying to get the dusky rose captured. So I helped a friend doing photography on her fabric she was selling. She was a merchant selling wool, so it's really hard to get. You have to trick the light, use filters just to get close pictures in the colors.
That is really interesting. I would be more attracted to the brighter colors, but that's also because I've bought into the neon phase of things right now. So that's
well, they really loved colors, and they have really bright combinations. If you're talking like 13th and 14th century, they would have all of it: pink, purple, green, yellow, all in one thing. That was perfectly fine.
Yeah, like I was telling, I still have to send you a photo, Nancy. The goldenrod that I played with, it's
you
like,
do. Yeah, you mentioned that last week.
It's very bright. It's like a neon yellow kind of tone. So it's exciting.
Yeah.
I'm all for the highlighter colors. Bring it on.
No, natural dyes are best seen in person, and they can go really neon.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah, they do. They just have a quality about them that they glow. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if it's mostly because of the fibers itself too. The wool fiber. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, I've been reading several dye books talking about it, and it's the combination of the luster, so to speak, and how the metallic salt just prisms the color somehow. I don't know. No one has managed to explain it, but they're just talking about that natural dye especially has this kind of luster, as they call it.
Well, and that's just a thing overall, I think, with using the natural dyes. You're saying that like a lot of times the information out there, it's maybe not accurate or incomplete. So like what is a recommended resource for somebody to start maybe reading about or learning?
This is my favorite.
Oh yeah,
because she goes through all the different kinds of dyes, the different methods of dyeing, and the chemicals needed, and how to take care of the chemicals and be safe. And also then she gives further advice on how the different plants and how different plant parts has to be processed in order to get the dye out, and all those basic recipes, and then all the specific recipes for the different plants are very useful. Plus she has all these color swatches for the different things. So it's definitely a place to start, and then just go wild after that, because if you know what she does, you can do it without killing yourself. No, because it's serious business, because like if you're allergic to something, you need to check that before you start playing with it.
No, I laugh because it's something of like I don't know. I've heard more of that, like, be careful, you're going to kill yourself with like soap making when you're working with lye, which has completely scared me off of soap making, and I never want to touch it. But that's, you do have to be really careful because you're using a lot of different types of chemicals, and it's that combining things that even with modern chemicals, if folks aren't paying attention, it can get very dangerous very quickly. Where you're not supposed to mix a lot of cleaning products with bleach because the fumes will kill you.
This is not something you should be sniffing either. So.
No, you should. Well, you also just shouldn't be, sticking your nose into things that you don't exactly know what they are. I know plenty of D&D paints that have ended badly. Yeah.
Overall.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Overall. It really rings true these days. Sticking your nose in things. Yeah.
Well, as a botanist and a scientist, I'm like, if you don't know what it is, don't touch it. If you want to be scientific about it, use a stick.
Yes. Yeah. That's my geology professors always carped on that of like, we always thought it was a joke of like, don't lick the rocks. But for some reason, the first time that we went out in the field, we had 2 students that just wanted to lick the rocks. Not really sure why. But there's this wild moment where the professor's like knocking this rock out of somebody's hand of like, don't lick that. And they're serious. So I don't know. Maybe it's a human impulse of like the inquisitive nature of I want to know what this is. So I'm going to like smell it or lick it or interact with it some way.
The geophagy moment.
Yeah. Well, there is the theory of people with mineral deficiency, they will eat dirt.
Yeah. Yeah, that too.
But yeah, no, there's a lot of science you shouldn't lick, and this is definitely one of them. But yeah, no, they use lye in here too, actually, used for alkali stuff. But it's like cooking. You use acids and alkali when you cook.
Mm-hmm.
And like depending how much you're using, there's a safe level and there's an unsafe level.
Mm-hmm.
And since we're using organic material, we're using organic dye material, we have to stay within a very narrow gap of temperature and pH.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why usually actually the chemical dyeing is a bit worse because those have a larger gap that you're dealing with. So you're actually using probably more chemicals anywhere closer to that. So sticking to the natural plants, you're scaling it down a little bit and you can keep a much lower level of the different mordants and stuff. And I'm using a super tiny level because I'm trying to go for like, what's the minimum needed to make these color changes. Mm-hmm. Because like I don't know what kind of access they had to different chemicals. So this is like what could have been causing the changes in what they're using for the materials they're using when they're dyeing. Like, did they have a spoon made of iron, or did they have a pot made of iron, versus did they have a copper ladle, a copper pot? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of historically speaking, when you can't go and buy aluminum for iron sulfates and copper sulfates, what can they achieve with just water and a dash of vinegar?
Mm-hmm. And what's the most efficient use of what they would be able to have access to or would be able to afford?
Yes. Yeah. And like, I don't know if they actually had access to vinegar, but if you just use the water, pH sitting and stuff, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I've noticed actually I can get a lot of changes with a very little amount of copper. Just boiling water in a copper pot is enough to give a difference.
That's really cool. I'm just really enjoying all the colors that you're coming out with all the samples.
I mean, there are bins and bins.
Yeah, this is just one bin.
Amazing.
And the other thing that was kind of fun too is your system of knotting, so that you can tell like which mordant it was, or
Yeah. So if I take one of these, let's see. So this one has a knot for what species it is, and this is the weld, and then you have the different knots. If it's on white or gray wool, I knot the ends on all the gray wools because you can't always see the difference afterwards. So it's all to keep up to I know which one it is. So this is I have several different species on this one, and this is the afterbath with 2 knots. So that means it's the alkali afterbath, and this is 4 knots, which means that this is the birch bark, birch leaves, and then we have buckthorn, madder, and weld.
Wow. To remind me of counting strings.
Yeah,
I really want you to wear that as a beard. Like, I just somebody, or not you, but it's just like the way when you hold it up, it's like, it's perfect.
And like this one is the one that is no afterbath. So this is what it looks like without any modifications. And then you have this one.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. The saturation gets upped pretty
And
substantially.
let's see where they all went. They're all in my lap here. It's hard to dig up.
It's a good system though, because paper falls off, ink fades, so now you'll always know.
Yes. And part of it is because I bring this along when I do my medieval reenactment, the demonstrations, the living history, and you just can't have paper labels on stuff when you're pretending to be a Viking. So, nuts.
Yeah.
That's almost ingenious. It doesn't break your immersion at all.
No, it doesn't. And you try really hard not to break it. So.
Wow.
But yeah, you have to remember all the knots, and sometimes I have a sheet. I have a legend of all my knots. It's even color coded.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
I'm a sucker for organization and color coding, so that's right up my alley.
Yeah, no, it's even I have the current ones that are going into the afterbaths. I have finally figured out that if I put them in alphabetic order on the string, it's much easier. Then I don't have to mark each species.
Gosh, I just love those yellows. I don't normally gravitate towards yellows, but those
Me
are coming
either, but
really
I love
brightly.
yellow, and those are just so,
Yeah, this is the welds, and this is weld on 5 different mordants. So that's the alum one, that really bright one. And this is with a dried, with the fresh weld, you get even more yellow. And if you add just a touch of baking soda, you get even more super yellow. So. Yeah, it turns out weld likes a little bit of an alkali pH when you do it. So that's going to be my next experiment.
Okay.
pH first, with pH experiment with the colors. But part of that is actually the afterbath, because the afterbath isn't one alkali and one acidic. So
awesome. We'll look forward to hearing about. We'll look forward to having you back at some point to see what you've done between now and when we talk to you in the future, to see what colors you're able to come up with.
The plants that you're growing, I mean, they grow pretty readily. A lot of these things are people consider weeds. Because didn't you say something about you like plants that can take care of themselves?
Yes, as a botanist, I like to enjoy my yard. I'm not going to be fussy with my plants. And since I often spend half of the summer away on medieval events, they need to be able to fend for themselves when I'm not home. So that's why I stick with native plants and dye plants, because many of them are weeds, and they're even considered invasive in some areas. So you have to always check the local rules before you even grow them.
Sure, yeah.
Especially weld. Well, no, Vogue. That's the one, the other W. Vogue is classed as an obnoxious weed in many states in the US, so you have to be careful with it. Weld is usually not obnoxious, but in my yard it grows everywhere. So but the bees love it.
Yep.
So I'm happy providing some bee food.
Definitely. Yeah.
The madder is usually not invasive, but it likes to crawl. It sends the roots everywhere. So despite the fact that I have them in a built-up bed, they are trying to grow everywhere. They haven't gotten so far yet, but they have. I have found them like 4 feet, 5 feet away from the bed.
Oh yeah, roots go deep and far, and you don't even see them.
No, and like I was surprised because our yard is clay, like solid packed clay, and I was kind of impressed.
Yeah.
That they actually got out anyhow. So I'll especially through the layer of rubble I put in the bottom of the garden bed. So if anyone wants some, seedlings, they are welcome to come by. I can always dig one up.
Okay.
Awesome.
Might.
Yeah, no, they're everywhere.
I remember that growing up with our garden. Everything was everywhere. Could never keep it where we wanted it.
Well, at least it means they like it.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I'm glad that they're happy. I just I don't really need pumpkin plants that are sprouting, gigantic baby pumpkins outside of the fence of our garden, and then I don't know. The deer love it. It's a mess to clean up. So
yeah, I'm surprised the kids doesn't pull them off. That's fine.
Yeah, that too.
Okay. Well, thank you, Anne, so much for taking time and being with us for this crafty chat. It was just, I don't know. I'm very excited about all this, all this dyeing and everything.
Yeah, and when all this COVID stuff is over or we have other rules, we are welcome to come over and see all the rest of it.
Yeah.
We'd love to.
Yeah.
That's it. I want to go deep dive into research now and find that book and do some reading. It's very interesting to me, and it's something that I haven't dove into a lot. So thank you again.
She also does have there's also a website. I mean, the book is great though. I definitely say, but you can also, if you want to go right now, you can look at the website. And there's a lot of you'll just fall down so many holes.
Heidi knows my research habits.
Yeah.
But thank you guys, our viewers, for joining us today for a Crafty Chat episode 21. We will be back in 2 weeks for episode 22. Until we see you next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and don't forget to love each other. Bye, guys.
Bye.